2018, a team of archaeologists published a peer-reviewed paper in a scientific journal. Not a conspiracy blog, not a YouTube channel, a peer-reviewed scientific journal. The paper described evidence of an airburst event, similar in mechanism to the Tunguska explosion of 1908, but significantly more powerful, that had occurred over a specific region of the Middle East approximately 3,600 years ago. The evidence included shocked quartz, melted pottery, vitrified mudbrick, platinum anomalies consistent with an extraterrestrial impactor, layers of ash and destruction extending across an area of roughly 500 square kilometers, soil salinity levels that would have made agriculture impossible for centuries. The site sits at the northeastern corner of the Dead Sea. The coordinates correspond, within the margin of archaeological error, to a city described in the book of Genesis as having been destroyed by fire from the sky. Its name was Sodom, and what destroyed it was not a metaphor. Before we go to the archaeology, we need to go back to the text, not the Sunday school version. The actual text, Genesis chapters 18 and 19, describe the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in language that, when you read it carefully, when you read it without the filter of 2,000 years of theological interpretation, is deeply strange. The destruction does not come gradually. It does not come as a flood, or a famine, or a plague. It comes suddenly, from above, and it is described with a specificity that most people have never noticed because they've heard the story so many times they stopped actually reading it. Genesis 19:24 states, "Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah, from the Lord out of the heavens, burning sulfur, from the heavens, raining down." Genesis 19:28 describes Abraham looking toward the cities the morning after. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace, like smoke from a furnace. Not like the aftermath of an earthquake, not like the ruins of a city sacked by an army, like smoke from a furnace, which implies intense, sustained, localized heat of a kind that ancient writers had limited vocabulary to describe. And then Genesis 19:26, the detail that most people remember but almost nobody thinks about carefully. Lot's wife looks back, and she becomes a pillar of salt. A pillar of salt. What kind of event kills a person instantly and leaves them preserved in mineral form? What kind of destruction, moving outward from a central point with enough force and heat to mineralize human tissue, would also explain the dense smoke, the burning sulfur from the sky, and the complete obliteration of multiple cities simultaneously? The ancient writers gave you the description. The scientists gave you the mechanism. For decades, biblical archaeologists searched for Sodom. The search was complicated by a fundamental disagreement about whether the city had ever existed at all, whether the story in Genesis was historical record, theological parable, or mythological narrative. Mainstream archaeology, for most of the 20th century, leaned toward the latter two options. Then came el-Hammam, located in the southern Jordan Valley, northeast of the Dead Sea. El-Hammam is one of the largest Bronze Age sites in the entire region. It was occupied continuously for thousands of years, a major, thriving urban center by any standard of ancient civilization. And then, approximately 3,600 years ago, it was destroyed, not abandoned, not conquered, not gradually depopulated as civilizations sometimes decline. Destroyed, suddenly, violently, in a manner that left physical evidence so unusual that when archaeologist Philip Sylvia and his team began systematically documenting it, they didn't immediately know what they were looking at. The destruction layer at el-Hammam contains features that do not fit any conventional model of ancient urban destruction. Pottery sherds with surfaces that had been vitrified, turned to glass by temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius. mud brick walls that had been melted and re-solidified, zircon crystals within those walls that showed evidence of having been instantaneously heated to temperatures above 1,600 degrees Celsius and then immediately cooled, a thermal signature that cannot be produced by any conventional fire, any volcanic eruption, or any military assault with Bronze Age weaponry. Shocked quartz, a form of the mineral that can only be produced by extraordinary pressure events, found previously at nuclear test sites and asteroid impact craters, and platinum, iridium, elements associated with extraterrestrial impactors present in the destruction layer at concentrations far above background levels. The 2018 paper in the journal Scientific Reports, authored by 21 researchers from multiple institutions, concluded, the evidence is consistent with a low-altitude airburst from a small asteroid or comet fragment, detonating above the site with energy equivalent to a 10-megaton nuclear weapon. 10 megatons! The bomb dropped on Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. Tall el-Hammam was hit with something 666 times more powerful than Hiroshima. Here is the detail that most people overlook. The detail that connects the archaeological evidence to the biblical text in a way that is almost impossible to dismiss as coincidence. After the destruction of Tall el-Hammam, the site was abandoned, not for a decade, not for a generation, for approximately 600 years, one of the most strategically valuable agricultural locations in the ancient Near East. Fertile soil, reliable water access, major trade routes, sat completely empty. No one rebuilt, no one resettled, no one planted crops in the fields surrounding the destroyed city. 6 centuries of abandonment. Why? The soil analysis provides the answer. The destruction event, whatever it was, vaporized the Dead Sea, not permanently, but the shock wave and the heat caused massive quantities of Dead Sea water to be lofted into the atmosphere and then deposited across the surrounding agricultural land. Dead Sea water contains salt concentrations approximately 10 times higher than ocean water. When that water evaporated and rained back down onto the fields surrounding Tall el-Hammam, it salted the earth, literally, in concentrations that would have made agriculture impossible for generations. Now go back to Genesis 19:26. Lot's wife looks back. She becomes a pillar of salt. What if that verse is not a supernatural punishment? What if it is a description, filtered through the vocabulary and conceptual framework of a Bronze Age writer, of what happened to a person caught in the open when a massive shockwave, carrying superheated, salt-laden air from an evaporated section of the Dead Sea, moved outward from the point of impact? What if the pillar of salt is not a miracle? What if it is a memory? The book of Genesis is not the only ancient text that records this event. Cuneiform records from the surrounding region, Mesopotamian tablets, Egyptian documents, records from multiple contemporary civilizations, contain references to a catastrophic event in the region of the Dead Sea Valley during the Middle Bronze Age, a destruction so complete and so sudden that it entered the collective memory of multiple cultures simultaneously. The Ebla tablets, discovered in Syria in the 1970s, dating to approximately the same period, contain references to 5 cities in the region that scholars have long associated with the biblical cities of the plain, cities that appear in the records before the destruction period, and then simply vanish from the historical record afterward. Not conquered, not absorbed into larger empires, vanished as if they had been erased. The Egyptian execration texts from the Middle Bronze Age, ritual documents designed to curse enemies of Egypt, list cities and regions as threats to be neutralized. The cities of the Dead Sea Plain appear in earlier versions of these texts. They do not appear in later versions, not because they ceased to be threats, because they ceased to exist. The convergence of evidence across multiple independent ancient sources, across multiple languages and cultures and record-keeping traditions, all pointing to a sudden, catastrophic destruction event in the same place at the same time is not something that can be easily dismissed as coincidence or theological invention. Something happened there, something powerful enough to be remembered independently, simultaneously, by every civilization in the region. In August 1945, 2 cities were destroyed by nuclear weapons. The physical evidence left behind at Hiroshima and Nagasaki has been extensively documented, and when researchers familiar with that evidence examined the destruction layer at el-Hammam, they noted something that stopped them cold. The pattern of destruction was similar, not identical. The mechanisms are different. A nuclear weapon is a sustained fission or fusion reaction. An asteroid airburst is a kinetic energy release from a high-velocity impactor. But the physical signatures they leave behind, the thermal pulse, the shock wave, the pattern of destruction radiating outward from a central point, the specific ways in which materials are heated and pressurized and altered, overlap in ways that are scientifically significant. The pottery at el-Hammam shows a feature that archaeologists had never previously encountered at a Bronze Age site: a layer of melted material on the exterior surface, with the interior of the vessel intact. This pattern, exterior thermal damage with interior preservation, is consistent with an extremely rapid, extremely intense heat event, the kind of heat pulse that a nuclear weapon or a high-velocity airburst produces, not the kind of heat produced by a conventional fire, which would heat pottery gradually from the outside in. The mud brick walls show another anomaly. They were not simply burned, they were melted. Bronze Age mud brick does not melt in conventional fires. It requires temperatures far above what any ancient technology could produce. But the walls at el-Hammam show evidence of having been liquefied, flowing briefly like a thick fluid before re-solidifying. The researchers who documented these features were not looking for confirmation of a biblical story. They were archaeologists and geologists and materials scientists following physical evidence. The physical evidence led them to a conclusion that matched, with uncomfortable precision, an ancient text written 3,500 years ago. Let's be precise about what the evidence does and does not tell us. What it tells us: a massive, sudden, high-temperature destruction event occurred at el-Hammam approximately 3,600 years ago. The physical signatures of that event are consistent with a low-altitude cosmic airburst. The location corresponds to the biblical region of the cities of the plain. The date corresponds to the period in which Genesis scholars have long placed the Sodom narrative. The agricultural devastation caused by salt deposition explains the subsequent 6 centuries of abandonment recorded in both the archaeological record and, obliquely, in the biblical text. What it does not tell us: whether el-Hammam is definitively Sodom, whether the biblical narrative is a direct historical account or a later theological reworking of a historical memory, whether other cities in the region, the Gomorrah of the biblical account, and the other cities of the plain, were simultaneously affected by the same event or by subsequent related events. These are genuine open questions. Serious researchers disagree about them. The identification of el-Hammam with Sodom is proposed, but not universally accepted. But here is what is not an open question. Something destroyed el-Hammam with catastrophic, city-ending force approximately 3,600 years ago. The mechanism was almost certainly cosmic, a rock from space detonating in the atmosphere above a thriving Bronze Age city, releasing energy equivalent to hundreds of Hiroshimas, killing everyone in the city, salting the surrounding fields, and burning itself into the collective memory of every civilization in the region. That is not a theory. That is what the physical evidence says. If el-Hammam is Sodom, if the destruction recorded in Genesis is a cultural memory of an actual cosmic impact event, then the implications extend far beyond this single story, because Sodom is not mentioned once in the Bible. It is mentioned dozens of times, across the Old Testament and the New Testament, across multiple books, multiple authors, multiple centuries of writing. It becomes one of the foundational reference points for divine judgment, for the consequences of moral collapse, for the relationship between human behavior and cosmic consequence. If the memory at the root of all those references is the memory of a real event, a rock from space, destroying a city in an instant, burning it to the ground, salting the earth for 6 centuries, then an enormous amount of ancient theological thinking was built on top of a genuine catastrophe. Not a manufactured story, not a parable invented to make a moral point. A real thing that happened to real people in a real place that was so shocking, so beyond any framework of normal experience, that the people who witnessed it and survived it and passed the story down through generations could only explain it in the most powerful terms available to them. God did this, and maybe, they were not entirely wrong. Not in the theological sense that religious traditions have elaborated over millennia, but in a simpler, more primal sense. Something happened that was so far beyond human power, so sudden and so total, that the only adequate response was to point at the sky and say, "That came from somewhere beyond us." It did. Here is the thing about asteroid airbursts that nobody likes to think about. They happen. The Tunguska event of 1908, the most recent large airburst in recorded history, flattened approximately 2,000 square kilometers of Siberian forest. It occurred over an uninhabited region. Nobody died. The world barely noticed. If Tunguska had occurred 8 hours later, it would have hit St. Petersburg. The Chelyabinsk event of 2013, smaller but directly over a populated area, injured over 1,500 people and caused widespread structural damage across a Russian city of 1 million people. It was not predicted. It was not detected before it entered the atmosphere. It simply arrived. The object that destroyed Tal el-Hammam was significantly larger than either of these, and it arrived without warning over a city of tens of thousands of people on what had been an ordinary day. The survivors, if there were survivors far enough from the impact zone, saw their city vaporized, felt the shockwave, watched the smoke rise like smoke from a furnace, and carried what they had seen back to their people, in the only language they had, in the only framework that could hold something that large. They called it the wrath of God. 3,500 years later, we have a different vocabulary, but the sky is the same sky, and it is not, has never been, will never be, entirely safe. That is what Sodom actually was, not a warning about morality, a warning about the universe we live in and whether we listen to it. That part is entirely up to us. Holy lore. The stories you were told were only the beginning. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we go deeper into the history that the official version forgot to finish.